Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Hillary and I'm the Public Programs Assistant Manager at the New York Transit Museum. The museum is located in downtown Brooklyn in a decommissioned IND subway station. Please come and visit. We're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're very excited to have Carol Willis at the Skyscraper Museum here today to speak about her exhibit, The Invention of Park Avenue. We also hope you get a chance to see it in person. It's going to be up through October and it is fantastic. Before we get started, we have some upcoming program announcements I wanted to tell you about. The most immediate news is that our sale for our popular Old City Hall tours is happening tomorrow, August 5th, starting at 10 a.m. sharp. These sales are for museum members only, and they move really quickly, so if you're hoping to snag tickets, make sure your membership is up to date. Also on sale are upcoming transit walks, including tours of Grand Central, 2nd Avenue, and downtown Brooklyn, among others. Any remaining tickets for these walks will be open to the general public on Friday the 7th. Some other notable programs this month to plug if you enjoy learning more about transit hub development. We have tours of Penn Station and Moynihan Train Hall on August 13th. And we also have a nostalgia ride to the Rockaways on Sunday, August 16th. We have a lot going on as we celebrate our 50th anniversary this year, so make sure you're signed up for our newsletter so you won't miss any updates, and I'll put some of those links in the chat. Now for today's program, if you would like closed captioning, you can click where it says CC, Show Captions at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see that option, click the three dots to see an expanded menu of settings. And you can use the Q&A function to ask questions, which I will share out at the end of the presentation. And now, on to the main event. Today, we're honored to be joined by Carol Willis, who is the founder, director, and curator of the Skyscraper Museum. She is the author of Form Follows Finance, Skyscrapers and Skylines in New York and Chicago, published with Princeton Architectural Press in 1995, among other publications. An architectural and urban historian, she has taught as an adjunct professor at Columbia University for more than 30 years. Thanks so much for being here, Carol, and I'll hand over the reins to you.
Thank you, Hillary. It's great to be with you and your audience, apparently from all over. I am here in the Skyscraper Museum, and I'm going to, although I'm not seeing myself here, lift up and turn the camera around so that you can see the gallery there. We are also open Wednesday through Sunday, but from noon to 6, and I hope people will visit us. We have free admission, and this exhibition on Park Avenue, the Invention of Park Avenue, as you can see, will be up probably into November. So there's time, but you should come down soon and enjoy the summer in Battery Park City, which is where we're located, the south end of Battery Park City. So this talk is similar to one that I gave at the very beginning of a lecture series as we were entering or kind of expanding the ideas that are in the exhibition. And as you can see, the Invention of Park Avenue, it has a subtitle, and it's really the thesis of the exhibition, Linking Rail to Real Estate. And it's particularly that idea that I want to talk about in this lecture. I've done a much longer lecture in a series that we did as a companion to the exhibition. It's actually a 6-part series. I'll show you the schedule of it at the end of this talk. And my talk was on transformation. Was the first was to set the stage, and in that one, which was longer than Hillary and Amy wanted to have for today, it's I don't know, a little bit more than an hour. I spent the first 40 minutes or so talking about Grand Central and setting the stage for Park Avenue. But I thought, because I've already given that talk and I listened to it again this morning, and I thought, well, I can't really do a better talk than that, and I certainly can't do it better and faster. So what I will do today is to talk more an abbreviated way about the importance of Grand Central itself, then turn to the creation of Park Avenue and its recreation in 3 phases of high-rise design. And we are, after all, the Skyscraper Museum, so this is our topic. And take that kind of 125-year sweep of the importance as generated by the engine of Grand Central of the development of modern Midtown, which I think can also be almost equally attributed to the linear extent of Grand Central's influence from 42nd Street up to 57th Street in what we think of as modern Midtown. So that's more of my subject today. And in doing the research for this exhibition, I was keenly aware there was a railroad underneath Park Avenue. That's is probably something that's not known to all New Yorkers, especially if you're younger and you haven't either learned about the trains that were there, or you're not a commuter that comes in underneath Park Avenue into Grand Central. But even I, as a historian, an urban historian, and architectural historian, which are my disciplines, was knocked out by this particular photograph. And it's the rail yards of Grand Central Terminal of the New York Central Railroads in 1904. So just after the plan is beginning to be undertaken to double deck and electrify the rail yards. And as you can see, maybe with my cursor down here in the lower left-hand corner, the corner of the train shed above the platforms. This is 70 acres of rail yard, just a little bit subgrade, where you can see the bridges crossing these this expanse of space that stretched from on the east side over here from Lexington Avenue and all the way over to Madison Avenue on the west side. So Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt and the Vanderbilt family eventually assembled all of this land, expanded their operations, and then what I'm going to talk about now very quickly is the history of the first Grand Central Depot and leading up to the creation of Grand Central Terminal. So in 1871, this train shed and terminal building on the 42nd Street side were completed after about 20 years of investment by Cornelius Vanderbilt, who had started out in maritime transport, but began to assemble and consolidate railroad lines through the 1860s and 1870s. And he managed to capture the only allowed access to Midtown, well, not Midtown, to Manhattan, to central Manhattan, with his acquisition and then consolidation of the 3 lines of the Hudson, Harlem, and New York Central Railroads. And you can see those all in the 42nd Street, like on the main architectural sections of the 42nd Street side of the Grand Central Depot. Moving quickly through the early history, you can see in this map of 1879, and then we'll see in a moment in the bird's eye view, the aerial view of the delightful Taylor's plan, how Grand Central at first had a narrow front and a long expanse and much fewer lines running into the shed that you see here. Now, I can't go into the south end of Park Avenue, but the trains are already running, not by steam locomotive because that had been forbidden, to the south on 4th Avenue, which got renamed Park Avenue, and so gave that name to the whole of the expanse to the north as well. But you can see here there are fewer train lines than you saw in that 1904 version. In this aerial view, Grand Central Depot is here at the bottom. You can see St. Patrick's Cathedral. You can see the reservoir at 42nd Street, and here's 42nd Street crossing over. Here you see the rail lines and some of the associated mechanical, the various support functions of the railroad in this view. And you can see also on the extension of Park Avenue, called 4th Avenue at the time, that above 56th Street, it is already bridged over. And you can see those here in the opening. So there's a tunneling already that has created the opportunity for a residential neighborhood in the northern section of Park Avenue above about 57th Street. So that technology you can see here in an article in the Scientific American was published in 1874, but in 1872, a plan was undertaken to improve. It was the 4th Avenue Improvement Project. The railroad cut and to bridge over and create a kind of mall effect around the vents that allowed the steam of the locomotives to continue south until they got to 42nd Street. And here you see the kind of technology that is really a continuous bridge rather than so much a tunnel. Those trains went into, by 1898, an enlarged terminal that you can see in the view above here. And the same train shed, which was the widest span and the longest span, 200 feet wide in the world at the time, taller, a bit bigger than St. Pancras Station in London, and longer as well, 600 feet long. So there was an extraordinary technology in every aspect of railroading. That's no surprise in the history of technology. But there was a persistence of this now more than 20-year-old train shed that was serving the expanding capacity, the necessity of expanding the capacity of Grand Central. Now it's called Grand Central Station. The locomotives, as you can see here, running south of 50th Street with the shed back here in the distance. You can see in the foreground the steam locomotives and the kind of heat and cinders and smoke and generally unpleasant environment that the locomotives caused. So because of, well, I'll go back to this slide in order to narrate the event, the sad event that precipitated the electrification of the rail yards, which allowed for the complete modernization of the rail yards and the station. The event that precipitated that was a terrible accident in January of 1902, when one of the trains, just before coming out of the tunnel, as the tunnels end at 56th Street, about 57th Street, one train in the steam and the smoke and the general fog back-ended another train and caused derailment and steam to explode all over. A terrible event that killed 17 people and injured scores more. That was kind of the last straw of a continuous complaint about the problems that the railroad was creating for urban growth and human safety. And in 1903, the New York State legislature passed a law that that no more steam locomotives would be allowed in Manhattan in 5 years. So it's setting a deadline of 1908. And this was the reason that the plan for electrification got serious. The technology had existed, and the chief engineer of the railroad, William Wilgus, who's really the hero of our story here, and I'll say much more about in a minute, but he is in the middle, he's sitting at the controls here of the ceremonial first electrified locomotive as you can see at the bottom here, September 30th, 1906, when the railroad's invention of their own version of an electrified locomotive and the tracks, and the whole system that needed to be electrified was first demonstrated. So before the deadline of 1908, but from 1902 and especially 1903, the plans were apace to not just electrify the rail system, and the entire yards, but also to double capacity, to increase capacity by double decking the tracks. And in this letter by William Wilgus, and his papers are in the collection of the New York Public Library, you can see that he lays out to the president of the railroad, William Newman, the plan. This is a 3-page letter and basically contains all of the points of the plan to not just electrify the train yard and to build a new station, but to create a whole new precinct, a precinct that eventually they called Terminal City, that developed the air rights above the rail yards. And this was the engine of real estate that would link the transit and the business of the railroad to really the future of New York and the stable and the kind of magnetic center of Midtown that developed around Grand Central and Park Avenue. So in this letter, and then in a second one that I show you here, that is a iPhone shot from the tables of the manuscript room, there is and these are from the Wilgus papers. If I can here, I'm just going to read to you in his language how he set out this plan. And he says, in order to give a wide plaza-like effect around this enormous building, affording light and air to the buildings, an elevated driveway on railroad property circumscribes the entire structure, connecting the North and Park Avenue's extension over the depressed rail yard, and on the south leaps across 42nd Street by means of an arched bridge, rejoining the original surface of Park Avenue at 40th Street. And he goes on to, in advance of that, he talks about the revenue-producing structures. So in this 3-page kind of business plan, he sets out the premise that you can see here on the north side of the terminal to create, and something that he gave the name air rights, which is different than we in New York think of it, air rights today as a function of zoning. But here, air rights as the creation of buildable lots above the train tracks. And this is a drawing by one of the early schemes, the early architectural schemes, and it shows you Park Avenue here to the north of the station. We're looking from north to south. And Park Avenue actually entering the body of the building. That's something that will return only in 1929. And in the meantime, we'll see some alternative images and a switch of architects ultimately to Whitney Warren of Warren and Wetmore, who designed the great Grand Central Terminal that we know and love today. But here, as you can see, by 1913, so this drawing is 1903. And only 10 years later, this is how far they got, which is very, very far, because the whole of the rail yards, 70 acres, has been electrified and double-decked. And there is the grid of Manhattan is restored, and Park Avenue is essentially created, an avenue out of midair. And the cross streets are connecting the east and west, where before there was nothing but a great gash of an impediment to urban growth at the east side and the west side. Now, in order to, I hope, speed through these even more, I'll show you some of the early schemes by Reed and Stem, who were the first architects hired in this limited competition that Wilgus and the railroad ran. And what you can see here is that the terminal is developed most conspicuously as a high-rise building, multi-story, mixed-use, revenue-producing structure. But what you can also see is this plan from 1903 to continue Park Avenue up and around the building and cross 42nd Street, just as Wilgus had described it in this first letter to the executives of the railroad. On the north side, there is something they called the Court of Honor, and this is an idea that vanished pretty quickly because the opportunity to produce revenue as it presented itself was much more appealing than having a great civic structure with institutions that needed to be supported by philanthropy or whatever flanking it. But it was an early scheme. The Grand Central that we know, you can see in the etching or engraving at the top of one of these stock certificates. And this is how private enterprise and investment banking raised the money among people who were the richest men in America, including the Vanderbilt family, of course. But the enormous amount of capital that needed to be raised to be invested in this completely privately developed project. The scheme for Grand Central that first was presented in these grand drawings. The architecture of Whitney Warren, who was a Beaux-Arts trained architect. He was much more of a society architect than Reed and Stem, who were railroad architects. And you can see in these early drawings, there were some in Scientific American, this one is from King's Views of New York, that all of those elements, except for the high rises, have been envisioned in this first, what we could really call in 1913, a city beautiful plan for civic grandeur in New York. The section of Grand Central, and I will only spend a moment to make the point here in this section that it's the genius of William Wilgus that we're seeing here in the continuous flow of pedestrians and the ramping, the lack of stairs, but the use of ramps in order to bring people from 42nd Street pedestrians down into the waiting room, the concourse, and then down to the trains, and the many multiple levels of trains and subways that converge or that move through the Grand Central terminal area. And even though you are the Transit Museum, I'm going to go quickly past this plan of how the different levels slip over one another with the long distance on upper level and the suburban on the lower. And you can see some of the sections of the way the buildings interconnect. I treat this in a much longer version in the lecture that you can see on the Skyscraper Museum's website or on our YouTube channel. So there's more than an hour of this there. The construction views show this process in its tranches, starting in the east side with finishing the double decking first. And you can see the three stages of the excavation to a level of about 60 feet, then about half that much on the second level, and then the trains that are still going into the shed that you can see here on this upper level. Other views show you the enormity of the amount of steel infrastructure that needs to be placed here. It is really bridging an entire 70-acre span of space from Lexington Avenue to Madison Avenue. And you can see the technology of the time is horse and carriage. In section, you can see how these two levels operate and some of the revenue-producing structures that were already built by 1911, when the earliest is even 1909. And I call your attention over here to the powerhouse that is creating steam and electricity for the whole of the rail yard. And this is on the block that will become the Waldorf Astoria. There was a separate realty company that was established, sold its own stock, and it figured large in this first round of construction in Terminal City, but I'll pass by that and show you from the Wilgus papers the same rendering that you saw, but with his handwriting annotations here in the margins. And he's most often calling attention to the elements of his original plan, and especially to the revenue-producing structures that are part of the whole scheme. From 1903 to 1913, when the terminal opened, is a 10-year span. And that was when they kind of created a ground plane that became Park Avenue, as well as all of the understructure that serves the terminal. In another 10 years, from 1913 to 1923, which is what you're seeing in this aerial view, all of the buildings that you see here colored and with their dates on them were completed. It's really extraordinary. This whole area will be built out by 1931. When you watch actually the whole series of lectures that the Skyscraper Museum presented, and there are, as I said, 6 in all, and there's a focus just on Terminal City in another hour, so you can see the sequence of adding buildings kind of animated. I won't do that for you here, but I'll call your attention right here to in 1923, the Shelton Hotel over on Lexington Avenue, which is just under construction. And it really represented the future, because the Terminal City will go from a kind of city beautiful, continuous cornice line aesthetic that is being summarized here in the New York Times. Let me see, okay, I'm a little ahead of myself and my remarks. We'll go into the vertical dimension of skyscrapers at the very end of the 1920s. But I guess what I want to do here first is to begin to talk about the extent of Park Avenue, now leaving behind the terminal. The rail lines that you see here of 4 tracks that are running south from 53rd Street here, so basically at Lever House, you can see in 1903. So they have a lot of work to do here in 1903. Across the street on 53rd Street is the industrial building that is the factory for Steinway pianos that you see here. This is now the site of the Seagram building. And you can see that same factory here in this view of 1890, where you see Park Avenue is not Park Avenue yet, it's 4th Avenue, and it's divided into two side streets that are bridged a little bit here every other block or so. And the railroad cut that you see basically is responding to the changes of slope, or to the topography of Manhattan. So in 1890, you see a view, and this is one that belongs to the Transit Museum, and they kindly shared it with us. We also found this one in the National Museum of American History, and all of the cyanotypes, the blue images that I'm showing you, are from the archives and in the digital collection of the National Museum of American History. And there are many, many more of them, and there are many in the exhibition, but there are many more on their website, and you should go there and enjoy them. What you can see in this view is the double decking of the trains running on 2 levels of tracks, which begins at about 53rd Street. So begins about here, has begun. So this is an important block really in Park Avenue's history, and captured as screenshots from one of the great PBS documentaries on Grand Central that was occasioned by their centennial in, I think, 2013. These are stealing screenshots that show you how, going south, the 2 tracks begin to separate there. From the National Museum of American History, you see the excavations, the blasting away of bedrock, and the tunnel that you see, one tunnel here above. And then in this wonderful sequence, you can see that there are now 2 levels from exactly the same position, and especially in the foreground, the vast amount of rock that needed to be hauled away, excavated and broken up and hauled away by railroad, of course. Some of the workers on site, as this kind of continuous bridge here going from 57th to 56th Street creates this wide expanse of Park Avenue that you can see here completed. Here's a view of this has got to be before 1920, so that date is wrong, but from about 1913 or 14. This image is from a collection that was donated to the Skyscraper Museum by Andrew Alpern. And it is many photographs and other support material are all read at the top plaintiffs' exhibits. They were part of a lawsuit by the first set of architects of Reed and Stem brought lawsuit against Whitney Warren and Wetmore for not paying them for all of the work that they did initially before they were squeezed out of the project. So as you can see, by 1917, there already are some of the buildings that are beginning to close up the big empty air rights lots that have been created by the Wilgus plan. So what you're seeing here on the west side of Park Avenue are the Marguerite Hotel and Apartments there, and completed by 1917. And I'll talk about that typology of the residential apartments and combined hotel type with some other slides in a moment. And you see them here over the rail platforms, the rail yards and platforms. And this is going through the center there. It still is Vanderbilt Avenue. So the avenue that we know today has to be recreated above the train tracks. And you can see it in the section below. Meanwhile, by 1920, Park Avenue looks like this. Automobiles have been invented, but they haven't completely consumed American life and culture yet. So there's still there's kind of a wide median where people are enjoying the boulevard, the urbanity of the boulevard right above St. Bart's. And here is the Ambassador Hotel. And you can see that the apartment buildings have filled in pretty much to the north already by this time by 1920. And if you remember this median strip, it will return in the new schemes for the redesign of public space on Park Avenue that are ongoing at this very moment. Just two images from the book that was published by the New York Central called Gateway to a Continent that recorded all the key buildings in the area. And these two are more nominally hotels than apartment buildings, but they also had, as you can see, as it says below for the Park Lane, it's a hotel both for transients and permanent residents. And so the important thing about all of these buildings that you're seeing completed along here on Park Avenue is that the first wave of development is residential development. It's residential, and it's really long-term apartments. They really are mansions in the sky, where with most of these buildings, the apartment dweller occupies the entire floor in a suite of rooms that are 10 or 12 rooms. The reason that they are called hotels or apartment hotels is a function of the building code in New York at this time. There was no zoning in New York until 1916. That was the first instituted zoning law, but there was some building regulation before that called the tenement house law. And even if you lived in a 12-room apartment on Park Avenue, it was called a tenement and governed by tenement house law unless it was a hotel, which made it a commercial building. And it could only be a hotel if these lavish and large apartments did not have kitchens. And so this kind of perfect marriage of a concept of a multi-story mansion that was serviced by very high-end kitchens or restaurants like Sherry's restaurant, and also the service staff. So you didn't have to have your own butler and 3 or 4 maids. You could use the services of the hotel, and there were even ballrooms in many of these buildings. So they had the ultimate amenities for high society without the expense of an individual mansion. So the character of Park Avenue was at first residential, but they were in these kind of hybrid buildings of long-term residences of very wealthy, high society people who had a prestige address on Park Avenue and helped to define the character of that street as it went forward through history. So seeing here in 1923, as I've shown you before, and then here in here we've got 1932, when the Waldorf Astoria has been completed. The office building of the New York Central, now called the Helmsley Building, has been completed and kind of stops, punctuates the axis of Park Avenue, and then all these private buildings here along 42nd Street. So if we go forward a minute to just a view that shows you the extent of 42nd Street from the west side, to the east side over here, the Daily News building, and obviously the Chrysler building. Grand Central is right here. But here we have a cross street axis that in 1927 skyscrapers begin to pop up, and by 1930 looks like this. If we go back for a second, we can see that axis of 42nd Street here. Here's the site of the Chrysler building. They're 4-story buildings, right? So the amount of growth in the very late 1920s, a function of the booming stock market and the growth of the city generally, but especially the investment culture in speculative buildings, is really changing the character of New York. And as you can see, it has also produced on Park Avenue a verticalism, which I think of as being the kind of essential DNA of New York, the skyscraper image, if you will. But you can see clearly the contrast between this first phase of Terminal City with its uniform cornice lines, and then by the late 1920s, this call it speculative expansion, but let's maybe just the business confidence that was part of the environment of economic development in the late 20s. So we see in the Waldorf Astoria the trains running here on Park Avenue underneath, and over on the Lexington Avenue side, we see, I'm going more quickly now, a city within a city. The hotel and condos has recently been beautifully restored by SOM, who used this 1930s poster as the inspiration for their own drawing that you see here. And I show you this charming painting by an artist called Thornton Oots, called The Last Train Home, and it's all the way from the 1950s. And what you can see here are two elegantly dressed for an evening, probably gala somewhere at the Waldorf or some other fancy hotel, boarding the last train at 3 a.m. as the workers are mopping up. So I call this out because it really is the multi-use almost 24/7 activity of Grand Central that turns it into the kind of generative center that is so important for Midtown, because it's not just the theater crowd that's going maybe back to Westchester at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, but it's the people who have been at nightclubs all night and have to catch the last train. And it's, of course, the commuters in the morning, and the shoppers during the day, and the business people who are going to the offices. All of these things reinforce the centrality and the density of Midtown around Grand Central, but also on Park Avenue. So as I said, the New York Central's building terminates the vista of Park Avenue when it's completed in 1929, and it also completes Wilgis's idea of having the continuous flow of traffic go into the body of the building and then up and around on the map, on the ramps, and out to the 42nd Street side. So that by 1930, this is the completion of the Terminal City project. And I realize how late I'm getting, so I'm going to speed more through these other slides because we are just entering the post-war period. With that completion, one second. With this completion that you can see of high-rise buildings on most of the blocks here, looking south from 57th Street, you can also see how cars have began to trim the urbanity of the public space, so they're beginning to take over, and this is increasingly true through all of the post-war era. So here we see the modernist towers that are replacing those residential blocks, and here in 1947, the first of the post-war office buildings that is at the corner of Park Avenue and 57th Street. You can see it's rather low rise compared to what we have today. And in a great Jane Jacobs article where you can see here that she summarizes all of the buildings that I'm only showing you 2 of the 6 pages of this article that are surveying nearly 80 buildings that were built in office buildings during this 10-year period that she's looking at. The most famous of those, of course, are the iconic corporate towers for Lever House, designed by SOM, that you see here. The first of the all-glass curtain wall buildings, and it's completed in 1952, or probably even more famous in the history of architecture and designed by one of the modernist masters, Mies van der Rohe, Chicago-based ultimately. In 1958 is the headquarters for Seagram, and it's set back from the street on a big open plaza, rises like a monolith on a bit of an acropolis. And both of these corporate towers, corporate branding identities, gave a kind of cachet and enormous influence to the idea of including an open plaza that eventually got written into the zoning law. And here in 1961, the Union Carbide built their headquarters, but about half of it was for speculative office space. So it was also an investment building. And you can see here in the coverage of the period in the architectural magazines and in the New York Times by Ada Louise Huxtable, the Park Avenue School of Architecture, where she lauds especially the brand name buildings of Seagram, Lever, et cetera. The more common solution for developers at this point, or the builders as they were called at the time, is this more kind of speculative, utilitarian block, creating a lot of office space within the zoning laws as they were allowed at the time, because here we're in the I think 1957, this building is completed. The address is 425 Park Avenue, and we will see the Norman Foster building that has replaced it in just a minute or two. But what you can see here is that the building takes that kind of setback wedding cake form that is characteristic of the 1916 zoning law, and it has a pretty catalog, bland curtain wall that you're seeing. Other experiments in more Starchitect before that word was invented, architecture, was the Pan Am building with Walter Gropius and Pietro Bellucci. The point to make here, in popular mechanics, that this is the most complicated building ever built, and that idea of multiple levels that we saw with William Wilgus is key to the placing above the terminal and above the tracks of the Pan Am, now MetLife building. And as you can see, it really exploded the scale of the old Park Avenue. And by the late 1960s, and I take this image from the last of a sequence that you can see in the lecture that we presented on East Midtown rezoning, where I go through in an animation don't have time to do it here, but each one of the buildings as they're added, and here you can see their dates. And what you can see is that almost all of the residential buildings have been replaced by office buildings. And these one in darker colors are the Waldorf and the New York Central building and another Poston building, the office buildings. They're really the only survivors from the original terminal city plan as it was completed in the 1930s. So by early 70s, Park Avenue looks like this, and I'm going to pass by them quickly. Well, maybe I'll go back in order to show you how these buildings to our eyes today look underbuilt compared to the ones that are post 1961 zoning and have zoning bonuses, the ones that you see here that are bigger buildings that I'm pointing to with my cursor. These rather tentative investments of the 1950s and 60s are a little underbuilt to what they could have been allowed to build at the time, but they became the maximum amount that you could build after the change of zoning in 1961, which I don't really have time to go into. We're almost at the third wave of construction because the replacement of those post-war office buildings began in about 2017 began earlier, but finished by 2021, is this building on that same site of the building that I just showed you with the setbacks, the kind of utilitarian version of it. This is Norman Foster's 425 Park Avenue for the developers of L&L Holdings, who ventured before the change of the zoning law to undertake the first new block front building on Park Avenue since the 1970s, so in almost 50 years. An extraordinary lag in development that had a brief interlude below 57th Street by the residential building of 432 Park Avenue that you see here. We could call it the return of residential, but the future of Park Avenue seems very clearly from this year forward or the last few years forward to be office buildings. And we're seeing that in all of the new investment that I'll show you in a moment. And here they are. Here are three Foster buildings, the one we already looked at, the newly completed 270 Park Avenue, the headquarters for JP Morgan Chase, and the one that is just beginning, not so much construction, it's in demolition right now, the old 350 Park Avenue in a new headquarters for Citadel. And all of these designed by the firm Foster and Partners, and Jeremy Dworkin from the New York office has given a lecture that's on our website if you want to see an hour's worth of history on this aspect. From their renderings with the JP Morgan headquarters on the skyline and One Madison, which led the reinvestment and showed demonstrated the not just the viability, but the desirability of the new architectural spaces on Park Avenue, the KPF building that you see of One Vanderbilt, but that SL Green completed around 2022, I think. So in summary, we can see on a site like 270 Park Avenue, the first wave of construction, the Marguerite apartments that you see here in the center of the screen, replaced by Union Carbide, the corporate investment on Park Avenue from the late 1950s and early 60s. The demolition of that building in 2020, and rising on the same site on a full block from Park Avenue to Madison Avenue, the Norman Foster designed headquarters for JP Morgan Chase that is now completed, open, and heralded by many as the most advanced office building in the world, the most desirable for its workers, which was the intention of the leadership there. It's an extraordinary story of construction, but if we look at the history, I mean, the engineering of this vast amount of steel sitting on these tiny little feet down here that are going between the tracks, as all the buildings on Park Avenue had to do from the first of the residential ones in the just after 1913. You can see how the building has to respond to the same challenges. Now, this was talked about by Jamie Torres Springer, who heads design and construction for the MTA. in a lecture that we had a couple of weeks ago on the public space in Park Avenue. And Jamie described the challenges of maintaining the train shed, the more than 100 and century and a quarter old train shed. And here in some drawings, you can see the section that could be William Wilgus, the redux, I guess. The public space plan by Star Whitehouse in coordination with the MTA and DOT. You see in some of its drawings for public engagement. You see one here, and you see the collage compilation of the problems of maintaining the fabric of the infrastructure and some of its deterioration, and the opportunity of creating above grade now a new median strip that would be able to recover for the public some sense of the boulevard that is Park Avenue. And so I encourage you to see that talk. You see the 6 lectures in the series now concluded, and all of these are on our website and on our YouTube channel. So Park Avenue, Past, Present, and Future has at least 8 hours or so of more of this material, including my longer version of Transformation that you can see on the website. And for that, we made this map that combined the real estate map of the Bromley's fire insurance maps with the train tracks map in order to link rail and real estate in a single image, as it hadn't been before. And that image is William Wilgus's inner zone of air rights and his outer zone you see here, which is the very same territory of New York City's new East Midtown rezoning plan, which is the incentive, the genesis for the reinvestment of that new skyline that I showed you that is rising now, not just on 270 Park Avenue, but on multiple sites across and north on Park Avenue, also on Madison, which is a part of the precinct. So with that more than 100-year history from William Wilgus to East Midtown rezoning, Park Avenue has extended the influence of Grand Central, the original influence of the New York Central and its train yards, into the kind of anchor and magnet that centers modern Midtown and has created in an overlay of one era after another of reuse and redevelopment, and has kind of stabilized and reinforced the largest business district in America and one of the world's most prestigious addresses. So thank you very much for joining me today. And I'm sorry I went a little bit long, but if you want to visit our gallery at 39 Battery Place in Battery Park City, or our website, remember the dates that we're open and that we have free admission. And thank you to the Transit Museum for allowing this lecture. I'm very happy to stay for questions and to thank you all for being here today.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much, Carol, for this really just in-depth and fascinating exploration of the transformation of this whole district. I can see how much there's even so many more details to go into. If you have some questions, now's a great time to put them into the Q&A. We could still take a little bit of time to answer those. There was one question here. Does construction over the tracks, you sort of talked a little bit about this, does construction over the tracks present challenges, such as no space for basements or mechanical rooms? Like how do they solve those kinds of structural questions?
Yes, for sure. There are no basements in the buildings that were built over the tracks, and that is as I said, in the third wave that's represented by the new JP Morgan Chase headquarters, that problem and and conundrum for a super tall building is even more exaggerated. And here's a building that's ultimately has 15,000 people or so visiting it a day. So you need a lot of elevators. Elevators need basements, mechanical systems. So all of those things are accommodated by the engineering. And in the exhibition, we have a structural model that shows how those the extraordinary fan trusses, as they're called, and they're kind of fingers that hold up the tray of the building, come down onto these tiny little points, and those have to tiptoe in between the tracks. And oh, by the way, the trains could never be interrupted during that whole time of construction, but there can be no kind of typical basement and mechanical areas. So yes, those are all elevated within the structure, but the greatest challenge is finding enough bedrock or, landing area for the enormous weight of the skyscrapers above.
Yeah, I mean, given that tremendous weight, is there like a limit of how it seems like every wave it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger? Could it go even bigger, or have we reached that kind of summit?
The limit are the constraints of the zoning law. So I strongly recommend people watch the East Midtown rezoning hour of discussion, because in doing so, you will understand how the city successively set constraints on what could be built. So the idea of building anything you want over your own piece of land, that ended in 1916. And the amount that you could build was reduced every time there was a major zoning law. And basically, there was one major one in 1961. But what East Midtown zoning did was to change a little bit that restrictive formula of 1961 and say, we're going to raise the amount of density. And it connected two important public policy initiatives. One was creating value for landmarks like St. Bart's or St. Patrick's Cathedral that were declared landmarks and so couldn't develop above their own land, but had air rights that were valuable if they could sell them to someone. And East Midtown allowed you to sell them farther away than just the adjacent block. And so unlocking the value of the landmarks air rights was one aspect, but for your audience, the more important one is that connecting and enhancing transit connections was a way that you could buy more density on your site. But there's still a maximum. The maximum is, the highest maximum is 24 FAR, 24 times the floor area ratio. And that is a substantial increase over what was 14 or 15 maximum before. So the buildings that you're seeing, which are very tall, are not restricted by height, they're restricted by floor area. And you want to find some balance between how much it costs to build high and how much space you have to make the most efficient floors, but also the highest quality of office space.
Right. Yeah, actually, somebody made a comment that I think speaks to this, that the Waldorf Astoria's wine cellar is on the fifth floor because there's
Yeah.
no actual cellar there. Um, and there's another question, because I guess, it's still, if you're being limited by zoning, there's still the question of stability. Somebody was asking, to what extent do train vibrations factor into that stability?
It's fun to read the earliest articles of Eternal City from the 19 teens and 20s when they first started to build the apartment buildings, let's say. They had all kinds of ideas about how to use cork as an insulator. But basically it's engineering where this is not my strong suit, but you separate enough and cushion against that. But they were highly alert to that issue because it would lessen the quality, the value of the building. So yes, there were engineering solutions for that.
Okay, great. And I know we're running a little over, so I'm just going to ask you one last question that I thought was kind of a good way to sort of wrap this up. Do you know of any similar projects in scope and scale elsewhere around the world that really kind of compares to what's happened here around Grand Central?
Uh, there are a lot of ways to answer that question, and the one that's I think most ironic for New Yorkers is Penn Station, how they failed to develop above the rail yards, which is a problem that we are living with at this very moment as we're trying to decide how to make a new and better terminal, having demolished the McKim-Mead and White Great Station in 1963 to 65, and the lamentable loss of that great architecture. But the train shed was never developed. And as a kind of, I speculate on this in other lectures, but as a kind of counter factual, you could think, well, if the Pennsylvania Railroad had been smarter about linking rail and real estate instead of just building a grand civic monument and spending all of their expense on the tunnels that needed to go under the Hudson River in order to get their trains into Manhattan, if they had developed the Wilgus idea of air rights, maybe Midtown would have been in the West 30s instead.
That's a really fascinating proposal. I guess we'll
And
never
we
know.
have Hudson Yards, which is something which is halfway done and by a single developer, which is by no means comparable to Grand Central, but is a gigantic investment that has spawned other real estate investment off of the platforming site that has had to be built for the related companies, skyscrapers over in Hudson Yards.
Well, I mean, this is certainly a great kind of concept to keep in mind as we watch the redevelopment of Penn Station and see what they decide to do. Okay, well, thank you, Carol, so much. Thanks you and the Skyscraper Museum for this fascinating presentation. It was just so wonderful to have you with us and sharing all this information. We definitely invite you all to go check out the exhibit, and there's more to come, but the Skyscraper Museum is really a really wonderful space in Lower Manhattan. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us today. Just a quick reminder, we have a lot of great programs coming up, especially a lot of 50th anniversary celebrations, as this is our anniversary year. We have a new tour season beginning, and so make sure to check out that sale tomorrow morning. Those City Hall tours go fast, but there's so much more happening that you don't want to miss. So be sure to keep an eye on our newsletter for everything that's coming up and down the road. I have the link to our program calendar and newsletter so you can sign up. Thanks again. We hope to see you next time. Have a great rest of your afternoon and great rest of your summer. Thanks so much, Carol.
Thanks, Hillary.